welcome to our coffee house discussion. My name is Anna.
Kristen.
Joe.
Lily.
And we'll be discussing who was the better, Federico Fellini or Michelangelo Antonioni. So
I think we should first start off by defining what modernism is in general. I would first start off by saying it seems to me to be a balance between what's real and what's not real. Anyone want to add?
It seems to have a heavy emphasis upon feeling, especially communicating it to the viewer.
But what feeling? It's more like the feeling of uncertainty in the entirety of modernism.
But at the same time, it leaves you thinking, and you have to actively follow along in the film.
And it's a constant manipulation of what reality is, both psychologically and then what's physically there.
Right. I also think there seems to be sort of isolation in all of the characters. There's sort of isolation with Guido in 8½. No one seems to understand him. He can't really convey what he wants, if he even knows what he wants. And then with Vittoria in Eclipse, she doesn't know what she's searching for, and you don't really know what's going on with her either. So there's a sort of disconnect between her and the regular world.
I thought it was interesting because in 8½, you saw what Guido was seeing. Everything he thought came to life, all his dreams, all his flashbacks and everything. Whereas in Eclipse, you saw nothing that was going on in their mind. So I think it was also interesting when the camera was constantly up on their faces, as if to suggest that we don't actually understand what they're going through or even what they're thinking. So I thought those are two kind of opposite presentations of what a man is.
Well, I read an article on Federico and Michelangelo and how they were actually really good friends, and his wife, the widow of Antonioni, said that they were basically the same person, but they just didn't notice. They were two sides of the same coin. Although then it touched upon how Fellini actually focused more on the outside and how the person dealt with their circumstances, and Antonioni was more why did they do something? In terms of 8½, how Guido dealt with the fact that he had a mental block and how he dealt with that, and then you had those three different scenes, his fantasy, his imagination, and then the reality, which you just didn't know which one it was at the time, which was the art of Fellini. And Antonioni had more of why did Vittoria break it off with this guy and then go to this guy? What is Vittoria's purpose for doing all of this? Why is she doing these things? And that's why, to me, Antonioni's film Eclipse was one of the most boring things I've ever seen.
I think if you look at the ending, really, the questions come up as well. In the end of 8½, the question seems to be what, because you're not even sure what's going on. So you can't even get to why, because you don't know what just happened. I'm not sure if Guido's alive or if he's dead, if the people were actually there, or if that was fantasy. And in Eclipse, it seems to be asking more why, why didn't they meet up? Because no one showed up to the place they said they were going to go. So it's a what versus a why, but I would agree that it's on the same.
And your point on the faces, it's kind of on Antonioni, is how they close up on the face, but you don't penetrate. There's a little wall there, whereas with Fellini, it's you're seeing it through his eyes. And also, going back to 2001: Space Odyssey, scene where they're going into the excavation zone to look at the monolith. You're watching that scene from the eyes of someone there. You can see the camera shake back and forth. So I would say that Fellini, with his shots aren't as he has more shots that are quicker than Antonioni, which are long, broad, wide open spaces, completely empty, the isolation. These areas ought to be inhabited, and they're suburbs where people live, but no one's around.
Would you deem that to postmodernism and new modernism?
Yeah, postmodernism.
Well, whatever.
Or
before modernism.
Yeah, I would say that it's kind of a newer form of modernism. With Fellini.
Definitely. I would say Antonioni's cinematography was very conservative. Minus a few things. He did have that glass
Yeah.
where he like that showed like the isolation a lot too. Whereas like Guido was through the eyes and he had a lot of shadows and actually with the music, I know this is completely like different from the shots, but like the music, all of a sudden you'd have like really fast-paced music and then it'd go back to slow, but the shot would be the same. So you're like really left with the confusion of why is he switching.
Because the music almost suggested hope. Like you saw like the music started like especially like in Eclipse when they were running together on the sidewalk or whatever, it says like, oh, they're gonna be together for life, and then they like come together and her face is just stone and she's just like, oh. But going back to like the long shots, I think that also emphasizes the point of them being wanderers and not knowing where they're going or like why they're doing anything, and like it's barren. Like there's like nothing there.
Yeah. Or like also the going off of that in 8.5, when Guido and his mistress walk into the hotel, it's empty. Except for the two people who work there. You don't see anyone else in the hotel. Just them. So more along that isolation, and like when he's waiting for her on the train at the train station, it's just him out there as well. And for some reason, I don't know what it was, but like when they first got to like this spaceship building site, that it felt rather reasonably at like a good pace up until then, and then just really went slower for some reason. I'm not sure, but just did.
It might have been just like maybe since it was the spaceship scene, because like it doesn't really seem like anybody would actually go there on a normal occasion. Maybe like the music and the pace just like really emphasizes the fact that this was not reality, and maybe that this was not real to Guido, but he just kept on going.
Eclipse does the same thing though with the slow and the fast, and when you're in the stock exchange, it's like so fast paced, and then all of a sudden you come out and it's Victoria again walking down the street, and it's just like the slowest, longest, drawn out scene ever. Whereas I don't really feel as though there was really a fast paced, slow pace in 8.5. It's kind of very steady, but it was because everything was just happening. It was so bizarre, just like one weird thing after another. So it was definitely a difference in approach to uncertainty. But they kind of got across the same message, I think.
I think that goes back to the point of like we can see it from their point of view, so we see the outside and how they're dealing with this, versus we don't know what's going on with Victoria and we don't know how she's dealing with anything on the inside.
I thought that was interesting too, the dialogue, that you would expect her to be more like deep, meaningful dialogue, but it was always like, I don't know. And you're thinking that like at one point maybe she's gonna come out with this great statement, but it never happens. And at one point where he asks her, I forget what the question was, like why can't she says, I wish I had loved you either more or like not at all. Like I think that was the most powerful thing she ever said, and it was like a sentence long. And
they don't even know what it means either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Too much ambiguity.
I think probably during that time that was like very impactful, but like now moviegoers, we always want something, we always know something's gonna happen, we always know something's gonna be like a giant catalyst for like a big climax in the movie. But seeing that, looking back on these films, those were the giant climax, or the climax were that there were no climax.
Well, with Antonioni, I was just thinking about what you said about like you're expecting her to do something, to say something. It's kind of as though the audience is forced to have the same sort of mindset as Victoria. She is searching for something, but she doesn't know what. The audience is also in that way, searching for something to happen, and nothing happens.
Exactly, and that's why you're left. She gets run over by a bus. That's what happens. You're just waiting for that to happen, but it's left hanging. It's kind of like, so you just got to see a little snippet of their life. Life goes on. Life is bigger than this, but we're not telling you what's going on. So, like, to go back to the beginning, who does it better?
I was just about to say, let's talk about Fellini for a little bit. I actually enjoyed Fellini better, and I think actually he did a better job of modernism, like presenting it, because everything was just confusing and uncertain. You never really knew what was going to happen. Even going back with the music, as I was saying before, it starts off fast and then it slows down a bit, and then all of a sudden it's fast again, but it's the same scene, so nothing really happened. Why is the music changing? Like, why is the film angle changing? And what does Guido? What is reality from his flashbacks and from his fantasy world. It all seems to kind of blend together, and it kind of blends together to a climax at the end where you can't tell the distinguishing lines anymore between them. So in the beginning, you can kind of tell between the fantasy and the reality, but at the end, you're left with, is he alive? Is he
Exactly.
dead?
Was this all a fantasy?
No, you're starting to sound like this is plot to Inception right here.
Why not?
Well, really, you can't even trust his flashbacks. Like, how do you know any of that even happened?
Like just thinking about it, like when he's with the woman on the beach and like those two priests just come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And they're both together. It's just them. They just come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And
I was wondering
really,
about that.
really
traumatized. How can you
really
take what
funny.
he said?
And like his mother's reaction as well, really dramatic. So it could have been based upon his feelings for his mother at the time, and just like through his eyes.
I was wondering if maybe, perhaps like modernism suggested a new kind of reality of like the psyche, of like psychology, and like what we take to be real to us. Like, yeah, I mean, even our memories are slightly shifted at times, you know, to be like happier than they actually were. And perhaps that's what it's suggesting. Like, reality isn't always what it seems, because each person's thinking something different and like has a different perspective on what it is. So I'm not sure, like, that was just something that I picked up from Fellini. I think he actually did do a better job of modernism because it was so like chaotic at times. Personally, I enjoyed Eclipse better, but
Really?
I couldn't handle like all the women and the czar, like
it was a little much at some point, so it was getting to like a little risque, but
well, it seemed like he loved his wife. You're like, oh, like there's redemption, but at the same time he's like, you don't understand me. Okay, like
I don't think he understood himself, and that was the problem. Like he couldn't convey to her that he loved her. Well, why was he didn't know why he wanted the other women in general, but which also leaves you to confusion. I'm guessing at this. How am I even guessing? Is that even anything to guess about? Because there's really, like, me trying to find meaning in this when there really is, again, no meaning. That's that whole...
So again, back to the main point. Who was better, Fellini or Antonioni?
What do you say?
Well, like, to modernism, I think it's Fellini. Personally, like, I think Antonioni's like directing was really, it was interesting. Obviously not for everyone, because a lot of people didn't enjoy it that much, but I thought it was really cool, like the way he approached, how each of his characters was like unapproachable, not only by all other characters in the story, but also like by the audience. Like, you could not get into their minds, you could not understand them, you could not get in their past, and you weren't going to. And like, that's so frustrating for like 21st century viewers who expect to know all the answers, have like a backstory, and like know everything that's going on, but for Antonioni, he's like, no, like, you're not getting any of that.
In a sense, though, it seems as though that is modernism, isn't it? So you don't think that he was better at modernism, or what? Why is that?
For the whole, like, manipulating reality, I think he just did such a good job of that. Like, I think Eclipse was modernism, but who did it better? It was, like, Fellini. So.
Yeah, I kind of felt... with the faster pace of Fellini, it would have been at least more attractive to like the people who are just getting into modernism, because it's like more approachable, quicker pace, tempo, and what I found was, yes, both Fellini and Antonioni gave you many questions. And for me, Fellini had most of them answered.
Really?
For some reason. Because I got to a point where I was like, I feel, he's having these fantasy daydreams on his descent into more insanity.
I think actually more answers were answered in Antonioni's, though, because you find out that they don't meet. Like, you find out what happened, because you go back to that place where they were supposed to meet, and you know for a fact that they didn't meet. So you know what happened. But with Fellini, like, I'm still, like, just because he's dead, like, I'm still, like, in my head, like, I keep trying to justify it, oh, well, he was with the people in white, and no one was ever in white, so they must be dead, or, you know, his wife accepted him, he must be dead.
Must be dead.
But at the same time, then it ends with him playing on, like, when he was a little boy on a flute, like, is that... So is that, did he actually live, and this was just his fantasy of what would have happened? You know, it seems kind of fantasy when he was killing himself anyway, so I'm still uncertain is what I'm
Yeah.
saying, is that I think that was more definitely conveyed better by Fellini, I would say that.
So majority vote for right now says Fellini is the better modernist, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to oppose. I think Antonioni was the better modernist. I think it was because it attracted me in a more traditional way, and the fact that you didn't really know what was going on in Victoria's life. And to me, modernism is basically, in general, uncertainty. And in its generally speaking, really, is uncertainty. If we're left what is going on, or left like with questions and all that stuff. I felt like Fellini answered most of my questions because of the sheer fact that I think I just have a weird brain and I can analyze it a little easier than other people. But definitely for me, Antonioni is the modernist here. But in terms of directing and who's the better director, definitely Fellini attracts more audience and more like of a general culture, as well as different generations to actually watch his film. I mean, if I could have, I would have walked out of it with clips because I thought it was really boring.
Cinematography-wise, I would definitely think Antonioni was more on the traditional side. So he didn't really try for really artistic moves, whereas like you are Guido in the sky looking down at your feet. You know, like it's very different and out there, and I thought that was directing-wise better.
Very reminiscent of Dada. And what was it? It like just the way it looked. It looked like Moushin Andalou. Just the way that the pulling the rope and falling to the sea.
It took me like 5 to 10 minutes to even realize in the beginning of that film. Like, is my sound on? Like, what's going on? Like, what the heck is he like? Is this real? Like, what am I watching here for the first 10 minutes? Whereas like Antonioni's Eclipse starts off like you're in a scene with Ricardo and so you know what's happening. You're in a scene. Whereas like with it even like throws you through a loop in the beginning of what's going on, and it ends in the same way. So I would say cinematography-wise, I agree that Fellini is better. All right, I guess we'll close with that. Anyone have anything else?
The only thing on my mind is like after you said it's like the entry into it, and like we talked about in class, it's everything that the soap opera cuts out. Like the soap opera cuts out the good stuff. We get in there with the aftermath, the stuff you don't see all the time.
Well then, I guess that's a wrap for our coffee house discussion. Thank you for joining us.